The Fire Emblem series has been one of my bigger fascinations recently. My history with the series is something I can cover in more depth when I actually get to covering them more extensively, but for a concise rundown, I first played and really enjoyed Awakening many years ago, but didn't really play any of the games afterwards until Engage came out, which I still haven't finished to this day. About a year ago, I ended up becoming really enamored with the series after playing the Sacred Stones for the first time, which led to me playing Echo soon after. While I haven't played very many of the games, I do really like what I've played and I'm trying to get English reproduction carts of all the Japanese exclusive games. I had one for Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, but a programming error prevented it from being able to save for whatever reason, so I ended up having to return it. For what it's worth, though, I did have fun with it. Now, if there's one thing I feel many people would agree upon with this series, it's that there's a lot of storytelling potential for an adaptation of some sort. Fire Emblem would probably be one of the best Nintendo series to translate to visual media, specifically anime because that's just the series' aesthetic and origin. I mean, just out of the games that I've played, the Sacred Stones and Shadows of Valentia themselves would make for great series. I feel that the core conceit of the series would make for a compelling animated series. The necessity to strategize each move with the ever-present threat of death with it being permanent, making it something that the series takes much more seriously than many other games. That alongside a large cast of beloved characters and the themes the series sends to cover could make for something really great. While I'm not sure if or when Nintendo would ever commission a Fire Emblem anime anytime soon, what many people forget is that the series already had a stab at it. In 1996, an OVA series would be produced and released, specifically based on the third entry of the series, Mystery of the Emblem. For those who don't know, that game is split into two halves, books as it's called. Book 1 is a remake of the first game, Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, and Book 2 is a sequel to that story. I imagine that the original plan was to adapt the whole story over time, but presumably due to low interest and possibly even low ratings, the show was cancelled after the initial release, which contained only 2 episodes. I'm almost certain they definitely want to at least go to the end of Book 1, because Episode 2 just ends on a cliffhanger as the group reaches the mainland. As well, on the cover, Mars is holding the falchion, which he doesn't get until much later in the story. I can only assume they want to adapt Book 2, otherwise I don't see why it's specifically based on FE3 and not 1. But then again, I only get that it's based on FE3 from online sources, so take that with a grain of salt, I guess. Back then, it was actually pretty common for video games to get adapted into OVAs. For those who don't know, OVA stands for Original Video Animation, a term specifically used for series or films that would go straight to home video, having no presence in theaters or on TV. Mega Man and Sonic would get their own OVAs in the 90s as well, the Sonic one being much more well known. I might cover these one day, especially since they're far more fondly regarded. It's not like the Fire Emblem OVA is incredibly hated or anything, it's just that less people know about its existence. And just at the offset, being cancelled after one release with 2 episodes is worrying to say the least. And final thing before we get to the show itself, in 1997 the show would be dubbed by ADV Films. Now these guys did a lot of licensing and distributing of anime and cartoons. They did quite a bit in the way of video game adaptations specifically. The previously mentioned Sonic and Mega Man OVAs coincidentally, but they also did the Mega Man cartoon that you're probably a lot more familiar with, the Street Fighter cartoon, the original 2000 Devil May Cry anime, 2 different Final Fantasy shows, one taking place in the same universe as Final Fantasy V, a Tekken OVA I didn't know existed which also didn't get past 2 episodes, Darkstalkers and Xenosaga also had animated series apparently. They did some more obscure gaming adaptations and even did a lot of mainstream shows in anime, such as being the original distributors for Fist of the North Star, Sailor Moon, and even Neon Genesis Evangelion. They did a lot of stuff in their day. They're kind of really dead now, and the ongoing series they were doing would be picked up by other companies. But they definitely left a great impact. Every time I look at their list of works, there's always something new that jumps out at me by surprise. Like Monster Rancher got an anime, did you know that? Not only did ADV dub the Fire Emblem series in English, they also distributed it on VHS in America. Yeah, you got that right. This is the first piece of Fire Emblem media to ever officially leave Japan. Not the Blazing Blade, not Smash Bros. Melee if you want to be pedantic, no. The anime that couldn't even be asked to live long enough to get past the first 3 chapters of its base game. This is the first taste America would get of the series. Meaning that there's at least one kid out there who saw this show, played Melee when it came out, and recognized Marth and the name of the series from this show. If you are that kid, please let me know how that felt. That sounds like such an interesting experience. The front of the box still even has los cojones to say it's based upon the hit video game series. Also meaning that there was one kid who watched this, wanted to play the game, and went crazy looking for a game that didn't exist. I'm not sure if the English distribution was a sign of having the games also leave Japan, and if it was, poor reception would guarantee that it wouldn't be happening anytime soon. The forces of evil are in serious trouble. What? Due to ADV handling the localization, some names wouldn't be translated properly, and I'm assuming Nintendo wasn't particularly helpful with this one, so the translation is pretty direct. The localization as is, though, would be the basis for one of, if not the first ever fan translations of FE1. Funnily enough, the FE1 cartridge I had this exact same translation with the same uncorrected names. Mars is Mars, Ogma is Oguma, but is still spelt as Ogma in the credits, Bartz instead of Barth, Jaga instead of Drog, that kind of thing. Additionally, some of the names are pronounced the same but spelt differently, like Shida and Jagan, and I'll be honest, aside from Mars, I'm used to calling most of these guys by their older names, so I'll be referring to them as such. Even though subtitled Japanese versions do exist, I watch it dubbed, and if you're mad about that, get this, I don't care. You can easily find both versions to watch on YouTube. Let's see, someone made a cut where it's only whenever Gordon's on screen. Maybe I should watch that first to see what I'm getting into. No, of course not. Let's just get started. Thanks to Chi Montana for uploading this. It's their upload I watched for this review, and I'll have both episodes linked in the description. Let's get started. The first episode begins with Mars and his sister Ellis running away from a bunch of ruffians, being protected by everyone's favorite Jagan. Ellis gives Mars her crown before using her power to let him and Jagan escape without her. The show takes a minute before explaining really what's going on with this.
It is a time before time.
Okay, buddy. In the continent of Arcanea, evil King Medius and Priest Garnus had a quick takeover of the central countries. They want to track down the Erishian Knights, presumably because their bloodline passes down the important Falchion Blade, or as the show calls it, the Falchion. I also have to assume that the crown is important, or even the Fire Emblem itself. That goes entirely unmentioned in the entire show. I think this because Garneth takes on the Erishian King Cornelius, who, despite having the titular Blade of Light, is still killed as shown in a flashback before the opening scene. Even after this, Medius' forces are still after Marth and the Knights of Erisha, who are forced to seek shelter in Talis, an island located away from the main continent. Medius' forces still being after Erisha causes a rift between them and the generals of Talis. This is a good setup told in a wonky order. By the end of the episode, everything made sense, but in the moment I was left with a lot of questions. Most of the story moments were good beats in the wrong place. Cornelius' death is placed so illogically that I had genuinely no clue how it related to the scenes surrounding it. The shift is so drastic relative to what was around it that I was lost, and it hurt a lot of the tension and emotion surrounding the scene. That's because the scene's connection to the preceding scenes isn't clear. It's supposed to explain that the Erisha Knights had to leave after the death of Cornelius, but it really doesn't. The flashback should have been placed earlier on in the episode and have it be established there that the only option is to hide in Talis, which would be both to the benefit of the narrative flow and the character development. There's a scene where Marth sees a conversation between Talis soldiers saying that the land would be a much better place if the Erisha Knights were just better at their jobs. This scene would have had a lot more impact, and Marth's disappointment would have hit a lot harder if we had a better idea of the circumstances surrounding it. Unfortunate, since the first episode does a very good job with Marth's character, and especially his relationship with Shida. You get some pretty nice scenes seeing how Marth is affected by the loss of his sister and father. When you first see him, it's in the presence of a bard song of an ancient revered Arcanean ruler who I forgot the name of. Not only are bard songs an often discussed yet seldom used part of the series, but we also get to see how having these expectations on Marth kinda weighs on him, taking a toll on him, causing him to not always remain present. We get a flashback of him refusing to kill a deer and Ellis saying he can find his own way to rule, disconnected from expectations, although it's clear that he thinks following in the footsteps of those before him is the only way to not disappoint them and the people who rely on him. And I think it executes those ideas pretty well. I'm not aiming to recap the whole series, but I do want to discuss this next scene in detail and how the first episode succeeds at expanding on the game's story and world. While Marth is lost in thought all alone, that's when Shida's introduced. I really like her interactions with Marth. She starts off annoyed by him accidentally ignoring her, but afterwards, these two's relationship is super sweet, especially in the following sequence. I like her being the levity to counteract Marth's turmoil and making it even better and more important that she's there. I think Shida is the best character in the show, actually. Marth is developed better, but Shida's adoration for Marth and her general personality is really great. The sequence of them together in the town is a great bit of levity to establish the character dynamics and the world before the story really kicks off, and it's just fun to see. It shows a lot of the world and people and is paced very well. I also like the scene at the end of the episode showing her convincing the people of Talis to accept the Erishians because of Marth. In my opinion, one of the best things an adaptation like this can do, especially for more primitive games, is to contextualize that 8-bit world, add depth where there wasn't, create and explore new dynamics we couldn't see before. This show does that. It's not always the best about it, but it makes an admirable attempt at all fronts, with this being the absolute highlight. That said, though, the show actually reaffirms a consistent problem with the games that I kind of expect to translate to a show, that being that there are so many characters that not all of them get decent dynamics or development. Saji and Maji, or Bort and Court as you'd probably know them from the modern translations, are both in the show, showing up alongside Bart, but they don't say anything, don't do anything, no one talks to them or even acknowledges their existence. They might as well not be here. Other characters from this point in the game are excluded entirely, so on the writing end, the massive cast would become an issue fairly quickly, I'd imagine. I mean, the second episode does a good job of letting Navarre, Lena, and Julian get some development, and the pacing at least allows minor instances of development within the main cast. Even then, it's hard to say how much farther they'd have room to take it while introducing new characters if the show continued. Although if you ask me, they did Cain and Abel right. You get to see how they bounce off each other and work together, and even see how their personalities imply their in-game traits, with Cain being the more aggressive one to parallel his higher speed and skill. I think they did our Christmas calves very well for this one. Gordon and Dogga have the most minor interactions that might imply some kind of ongoing bond, or at least mutual tolerance, it's hard to tell. I'm personally more distracted by Gordon's voice. He's kind of a lunatic, and I can't tell if he's loving the role or was given awful direction. Either way, I love it. 5 points! The voice acting is fine overall. Sheeta was clearly done the best. Her actress actually sounds like she's having a lot of fun in her role, and her voice fits very well. Mars and Oguma have pretty good acting overall, but most of the rest of the characters are either insanely over-exaggerated, like Cain and Gordon, or are pretty standard, some of them being outright stilted and awkward. At the very least, some of the line reads can be pretty funny, albeit unintentionally. Once we get to the second half of the episode, that's when scenes from the games begin to be more directly adapted, with pirates invading the main city of Talos and setting it on fire within 5 seconds. Very impressive. The stakes feel more real visualized, and now it's time to jump into action as the Rishi Knights finally get their call to arms. The action is nothing too special, but it's still pretty good, still being entertaining with some cool shots and set pieces in this fight in particular. Can't really judge the choreography of the fights that much, but either way, it's still pretty good. By the end of the episode, not only does the plot setup finally make sense, but they also give in a few last-minute details to round off Sheeta's character. Then the episode ends with a very good rendition of the Fire Emblem main theme. I overall think that the first episode is quite good at establishing what it needs to get done, making way for the second episode, which covers the next 2 chapters. I still like this one, but it is evidently way more flawed. Expanding upon Navarre's motives is nice, especially his reasons for joining the army, and the time Mars spends in the village consulting with Jagan and the villagers over their next move really emphasizes an element of the game's strategy. It's nothing mind-blowing or nothing all that special looking at it, but I still think it's kinda neat to see this kind of thing visualized. And then once they make it to Devil Valley in the second half, that's when the more interesting parts of the episode start coming in. Navarre and his talks with Lena and Sheeta set up some very interesting ideals and a good character. Navarre believing he's beyond saving and being unable to find a reason to fight are definitely a solid basis for a character that already seems cool on the surface with his dual-wielding killing edges. It also kind of explains why he takes so much interest in Lena, who's a priest. He wants a god to save him despite not believing it to be possible. An improvement over the game where his character and reasoning for joining Mars is "a woman told me to." It's just that he unfortunately gets introduced in the second half of the last episode. Expanding upon Hyman, Julian, and Lena's roles into whole bandit systematic kidnapping and fights is another instance of world building that makes sense and the game just wouldn't have the time to do. Also, why is this guy sending a priest into the arena? Is he stupid? The biggest problem here is that the budget seemingly ran out. There's supposed to be a big fight scene that very swiftly devolves into a series of still images. I'd imagine that there wasn't that big of a budget for this, and it was probably running dry really quick. I mean, as for the animation overall, I have a very strong adoration for old-timey animation like this. Whether it be Western-made, anime, whatever. If it looks ancient, you can tell the hand-drawn effort behind it. I love it automatically, even if it's objectively bad. I mean, objectively, this itself isn't great, although with the lighting, shading, and highlights, it does look better than most video game adaptations from that time period. Not that there's much in the way of fearsome competition, but it's an accolade nonetheless. Some scenes aren't as fluid as others, the front of some characters' hair moves with a mind of its own, and again, by the end, the fights forget to be animated, but I think the characters themselves are accurately portrayed visually and clearly had the most care placed into them, which is a good thing because there are like 1, 2, as many times as it happens, too many times where we get an uncomfortably long close-up on someone's face where nothing is said, and it lasts way too long to just be getting their emotions through wordlessly. It happens with Jagan, Sheeta, Oguma, Mars gets it like 5 times. I also love the scene where Sheeta's just pacing back and forth in front of Oguma, and it goes on for like way too long. Like, we get it. That kind of thing makes me laugh more than anything. Speaking of Sheeta, her hair was made a lighter cyan tone, so now she just looks like Erica from FE8. I don't know if there's an intended correlation, but I just find that funny. The episode ends with Marth and friends making it through the other side of Devil Valley into Orlando. There's still plenty of difficult battles ahead. Screw yourself, the show's over. You can feel how badly at this point the show probably should have continued. There's a flashback with Oguma and Sheeta that set up something that seemed pretty interesting, and now we'll never know what the heck that was supposed to mean. We don't get to see Navarre's extended character find purpose or be saved. We don't get to see the character relationships progress or how they'd have interactions with the new characters that get introduced. Pretty sad, honestly, but that's just the nature of a canceled series. I'm certain that I can get some of this by actually just playing the rest of FE1, but I found this show genuinely compelling because it did what it needed to. It expanded that world and gave more interesting characterization than you'd get from an NES RPG at the time. What it does genuinely well. It's not great, it has flaws, it's not even really objectively good, but it's so charming. That may be partially because of the Fire Emblem world and characters I find myself easily being drawn in by. I really like the stories and characters of this series, and I think this show perfectly shows how well it could translate to an anime if it were given a second chance. If this show were to have continued, I'd feel it would genuinely be on track to progress into something legitimately pretty great despite its early faults. The character dynamics were mostly in place, and continuing could have raised the tension and stakes which don't feel especially high at this point in the show. If you're a fan of the series, even a relatively new one like me, then I'd say it's worth giving a shot. It's short and easy to get through and acts as a solid lead into the Arcanea story. It's gotten me more excited than ever to actually finish FE1. A lot of my praise for this show could just come from the charm I personally see in it, or maybe just thinking from what could have been, but I don't really care. I thoroughly enjoyed the execution, as flawed as it may be. At the end of the day, the flaws don't bother me, and I can just enjoy the show for what it is. And sometimes the best thing a show like this can be is very charming. I give the Fire Emblem OVA a 7 out of 10. It's good, although I feel it had potential to be much better if it were given a better chance.